So until a decade ago, governance was a sideline issue. But today, governance has moved from the back burner into the flaming pit of relevance. Given the profusion of real, tangible, and practical answers to the question, how can we change the rules? You'll be relieved to know that our panel isn't going to talk about the causes and issues and the controversies on this matter. They're going to go straight to the solutions. And what a world of panelists we have.
The communities we serve have changed. Their needs are changing. Fact. Okay? In certain cities in Britain, the population is not a minority population. It is a majority population. In London, it's tipping over 50%. In some of the other regions, it is too. So if you don't start changing some of those governance responses, you're not going to meet the needs. How are you going to find them? You're becoming more isolationist.
The key point for me that I've tried to really keep forefront in my mind now is that I'm in this position, but I am not the diversity. I'm a black man in a world that's mostly populated by white male, or in some cases white female decision makers. But the fact that I'm here and I'm black does not guarantee diversity. It's really up to me to bring more inclusiveness into the decision-making process and the group of gatekeepers that are there. And I have to think a lot about what happens when I'm no longer in this position. Does the diversity that I've tried to bring into the decisions that we make at TIFF, does that remain? So have I built a structure that will actually allow for even greater inclusion after I leave, or am I the kind of single post of diversity for a brief moment? And so that, to me, is what I try to encourage other people who are in similar positions to always think about. Just because you get into a position of influence doesn't mean that the job is done.
Right. Through this. I think my basic message is one you probably all know and that we've heard so well expressed and conveyed. Cities are crucial and critical to successful migration, diversity, and inclusion outcomes. The place of cities, the role of cities and their institutions really are critical. This moment we are living in has been rightly called the age of migration. More people than ever are moving outside of live outside their country of birth. The number of both immigrant sending and receiving countries is greater than ever. This conference asks us to consider and to act on what policies, programs, and measures can enable us to make the most of this age of migration. Immigrants and diverse populations overwhelmingly gravitate to urban places. We know that from our experience and from all the statistics we're aware of. Cities can be beacons of sanctuary and inclusion, or they can be sites of marginalization and exclusion. Sometimes we know also that cities have both characteristics embedded in them simultaneously at the same time.
So I'll start first by saying that I think we talk a lot about structural barriers to being in positions of power and don't often recognize that many of us who don't have that feeling of belonging have psychological barriers. And so for me, for example, having been born in India and grown up in Central America, coming to the United States as an outsider has been a long journey to traverse, and it's a journey that I still go through. It's a journey that many of the folks that we at the New American Leaders Project train to run for office have to continuously overcome, and it is not helped by the fact that, for example, in today's and in many moments in our political conversation, in the conversation at the Oscars even, that we are that immigrants and people of color are vilified and kind of left hung to dry. And so this barrier that we have to overcome of not feeling like we belong and feeling like outsiders, even when some of us are second, third, fourth generation Americans, is really a critical struggle that immigrants and people of color have to overcome, and that those of us who want to address that obstacle have to be really aware of, so that regardless of whether there are quotas, regardless of what programs are in place, the psychological piece is something that is, much harder in some ways to address. I think despite those two challenges of being outsiders and lacking political capital as well as social capital, many of us who have fought to be here really want to do something in our communities and really want to be part of democracy. So that's a huge opportunity. It's an underexplored opportunity. I think in the United States there's a lot of political apathy and an assumption that immigrants are part of that apathy, but actually I think that immigrants can be some of the most optimistic people about the American dream, certainly the economic dream, but also the political dream.
Okay. So what role does political leadership play in changing governance? Why don't we start with you?
It's absolutely fundamental, vital, essential, critical, whatever other synonym you want to use there. It's as sweet and short as that. And just as to add to that, I'll give you two examples in terms of the political leadership. I mentioned earlier on that we had the representation of gender, but particularly minority groups and people with disabilities, drop a few years ago. Why? Well, that was because 2 governments ago, the government and the political leadership made clear statements, clear commitments, and I would say demonstrated unapologetic leadership. That's the phrase I use. Unapologetic leadership to say, this is the ambition, this is the goal, now we want you to see you doing it. That was the 2 governments ago. The last 2 that came in, silent. They said, yes, we need to get more inclusive, we need to have more diverse boards, we need to get more inclusive communities. We will commit to gender equality. They were totally silent. You go on the website, it's still silent. Yeah? So last year, the leading civil service commissioner then realized, oh my goodness, things have got to be improving. And he is a really great guy, actually, a man of integrity, gets the values piece, speaks from the heart, showed that unapologetic leadership, and signal again, do it. So there we go. And in terms of the other general politics, again, it's when the politicians have got together and said, in terms of representation in our civic leadership, in our political leadership, municipal level of politicians, put your money where your mouth is, get some money in there, we've got to develop. It's parallel. So it's recognizing that, while you're changing the bigger architecture of the system, if you like, which is still generally exclusive, you've got to do it. So it's fundamental, and it's got to be unapologetic.
I think it's really, we've seen this happen in other communities where the election of the first or the only attempts to signal something from the community, but I do think it's important that we don't equate an individual's success with any indication that the community, the ethnic community to which that person belongs, now suddenly has open pathways, right? So I think President Obama's success is a big moment in our country's history, but it is also very much about the kind of person he is and the coalition that he was able to build.
To be clear about what we mean by that terminology, because diversity is often a word for representation, and I can't remember who said it, but diversity is what's walking through the door, but inclusion is what you do with it. And what I was being reminded today, it's actually very complex. It is very complex. The thing that was both reinforced and it reminded me of the constant struggle I have was around that when you're dealing with both the diversity and the inclusion, it's seeing the whole of those multiple diversities and how do you engage with that? Because that, again, why am I being included? Why am I being invited? What is it you want from me? So there is something there about both the size of the challenge, which can sometimes feel overwhelming is maybe too strong a word, because like Sayu, I'm the eternal optimist. But actually, it's just being reminded that it isn't always a comfortable space and place from which to advocate from and to deal with and to respond to.
Good. Thank you. Cameron.
When I think about this conference, I think what I'm most impressed by and what I've learned is just that it happened at all, and that's a good thing, that all of us are here devoting our time, taking a day to think and talk about inclusion. Some of us do this on a daily basis. Some of us are given the opportunity to do this now. That is great. What I then always ask when I see a room full of beautiful people like this is who's not here? Where are the younger people? Where are the people who represent, for those of us who live in Toronto, all of those other postal codes? How narrow is this inclusive group? So that's always the question, and that's what kind of gets me thinking, and I think there are opportunities there.